I guess the disagreement that me and Adam had was like, okay, did the ancient Greeks, or some, obviously not all, I'm sure there's obviously a variety of thought, but did some or most ancient Greeks believe that Atlas was an actual Titan that existed physically underneath the earth, and that he was holding it up, or holding the heavens up, or whatever the myth is, and that Zeus, like the reason lightning existed was because some guy was literally throwing the lightning bolts, and was Apollo really riding a chariot across the sky, and that's what the sun was? Or was it just kind of like a metaphorical story they told to represent nature?
You have the difficulty of really in there because all representations have these limitations built within them. For example, think about 2 + 2 = 4. Here, there's the simplest representation you can think of. It's very basic, concrete. Even a person, any third grader would know that. But to what? You have to have that defined in such a way. And what science tends to do is break things down into these tiny little chunks. Now, when a Caesar would perform okay, let's use this in the political context, all this taking down of statues. In the 1st and 2nd century, they couldn't build enough cults to Augustus Caesar. When they would build those statues and build those temples, and cities would organize themselves in order to build statues and temples about Augustus Caesar, were they strengthening the Roman Empire?
Sure.
Yeah, weren't
totally.
the statues making the empire stronger?
Right.
Yes.
And a lot of this gets in, monuments. Well, what is a monument? Well, and so then when, for example, the United States invaded Iraq, they tore down all those statues to Saddam Hussein. He had his image up everywhere. Now, the question is, what power do those statues have? Now, we don't have Saddam Hussein riding around like Apollo in a golden chariot through the sky, but those statues certainly had power. And part of the reason they had power is that they had power with people. And that people mediated then all of the other individual instantiations. And so was it scientific? Well, not in the way that if Apollo is riding up into the sky and you have an anti-aircraft gun, you can shoot at him. But it was instantiated enough that the statues of Caesar Augustus gave power to the Roman Empire. Because then you have to ask the question, well, this gets boiled down into many things, like what are you as a human being? Are you functionally a story, or are you an organism enveloped by skin? It's a really hard question.
This is so confusing. You're confusing me so much, Paul.
Yeah, Scott Adams. It's the effect I have. I had it on Scott Adams. I have it on you.
I read your tweets and I understood them all perfect. I'm like, I understand exactly what you're talking. I have no idea what you're talking about here.
Well, this
totally lost me.
Just the Greeks. Did they believe there literally was a Mount Olympus and that there were gods there? Like, they believed if they had some sort of craft, they could travel to Mount Olympus and interact with the gods personally. Did they believe that, or was it more like a Santa Claus thing where we all believe in Santa Claus, right? But we know Santa Claus is a myth that we all believe in collectively because it's like a communal ritual that we all engage in.
The difficulty we have is with those categories. Let's use Native Americans. When they would put on a mask, they would become the god.
Right.
Now, how? In a sense, they became the god in the community. The difficulty with these questions are that we want to reduce Apollo to something that we are right now. And the question is that actually fair to Apollo? Clearly Apollo is these gods are metaphorical. They are. This also gets into, let's say, ancient heroes, or not even ancient heroes, contemporary heroes. It gets into someone like Abraham Lincoln. Who was Abraham Lincoln to the north? He's a different person. Then to the south, he's a different person. Now, no one is arguing that Abraham Lincoln walked on water, but some of what Abraham Lincoln did was truly amazing because of how he accomplished it.
Right.
Jordan Peterson has a nice treatment of this, because one of the things that he notes is that
I know, I was going to say, this sounds like a Jordan Peterson.
people are so,
I know.
the history is so filled with people that when you build a statue, that statue works because all of this is mediated through people.
So
yeah, but like,
ahead,
okay,
Sitch.
so like with the Native Americans, I assumed, and I'm wrong. I mean, I don't know anything about this. I assumed like when they put the mask on, they were believing or acting like they were being channeling or possessed by the spirit of the god or whatever in a more literal sense, not just that it was like a representation of the idea.
The problems with this is in the word literal. And see, and everybody has the problem, says, oh, the problems are the metaphorical. But when you go down to the mall, is that really Santa Claus?
No. The person dressing up as Santa Claus. Because, boy, well, here's the difference. Like, we know, okay, let's go back to Abraham Lincoln. I think that's a good example. Like, people, I imagine everyone agrees that Abraham Lincoln was an actual person who existed in the past, and he did things, right? Like, we all agree about that. Now, everyone might have their own perceptions or ideas about, you know, the greatness or not greatness of Abraham Lincoln and blah, 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 blah. But everyone agrees that that was a guy who existed. Like, it's not a question of whether Abraham Lincoln existed or not, and whether he was president or not. So I think the contention that I was having with Adam is, well, did people think that Zeus literally exists or not, or really exists? If you have a problem with the term literal.
Let me ask you this question. Did Abraham Lincoln free the slaves scientifically?
Well, obviously that's a very simplified version of the events, but you could say that, sure.
What does it take to free a slave? Does it take taking a hammer and releasing shackles from a specific slave's arm?
But I don't understand what this has to do with the art, with the question.
Well, go back to my Uncle Sam example. Did Uncle Sam beat the crap out of the Japanese Empire?
Well, Uncle Sam doesn't exist. It's like it's a figment of I don't know, of America's imagination. It's just an idea about something that represents America.
I would say you believe in Uncle Sam every time you pay your taxes. Because
well, we believe in the U.S. government, and then we use Uncle Sam as a representation. But no one believes that the actual person Uncle Sam is like. I mean, I don't know if that was actually based off a real person, but no one believes that Uncle Sam is like an actual dude who controls America.
Right. But even are dollars scientific? In what realm do dollars live?
What do you mean? What do you mean by scientific? I don't know.
Well, that's my point of the question, is that everyone's looking at the one end of it and saying the problem is, well, Zeus, we couldn't lay our hands on Zeus. Well, the problem is actually on the scientific end of this, because we use this word scientific as if we know what we're saying. And I would assert we sort of do, because when you boil that down, let's say to the scientific method, well, I take water, I take electricity, and I can produce hydrogen and oxygen. And there are ways that I can test whether there's hydrogen and oxygen. Well, there's science. That sphere is not going to probably be able to answer the question that you're asking about Zeus. Now, was there differences of opinion in ancient Greece with respect to the nature of the gods? Absolutely. You can find that in ancient Greek texts. There was some were skeptical about it, others were not. That realm of opinion is probably more a function of human cognition than the specific question you're trying to answer.
Well, in Christianity, there have been times when people interpreted the Bible more literally and more metaphorically, correct? Like that bounces around over history.
Yes.
Okay.
And it has always bounced around. You can find ancient church fathers that have a lot of question about how on earth do we understand Genesis 1 through 11, for example, the early parts of the Bible.
It feels a little bit like a punt because it feels like what you're trying to say is that, like, we have this model of the atom that we constantly use. But obviously that model of the atom is just really kind of a metaphor for the actual atom, because really the actual atom doesn't look anything like that. We don't really know how the actual atom works mechanically. The electrons seem to exist in various states at the same time, something that doesn't exist in the Newtonian view of the world. So is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes, because when you say the actual atom doesn't look like that, every looking has to have built within it the frame of looking, because the actual atoms of this cell stand look just like this. But we're looking at it from a perspective that has the looking built into it. So then when I was growing up, we had these pictures of the protons and the neutrons and the nucleus. And, there's no looking at it like that apart from a place. And we have the same problem with the question of whether the world is flat. If I'm standing in Central California, looking with these eyes, the Central Valley is very flat, and then I see Mount Diablo. That's what it looks like. But if I open up a science book and I see this round globe, well, where does the Earth look like that from? And aren't I also looking at atoms? But I'm also looking with atoms. And so the question is difficult because of the looking. And this actually is the big question of modernity and why it's ending. Because we have come to the end of being able to close one eye and look at the world through what one philosopher called the scientific image, which is an imaginary process whereby I look at the world and imagine I'm looking at the world as such. So these questions all have the same problem built into it.